Okay, so back to what's this article called again? Process concept of relationship. So I think a little bit more than halfway through it. I have not reread what I read yesterday, so hopefully it's still in my head. Let me just skim. So talking about flow and what stops flow and how feelings and actions are connected as flow, expressive action, feeling cannot really move without expressive action, right? Expressive action is therefore vital. Vital, that's an interesting word. Vital, vitality. It's like essential. It's means like vitamin. I'm guessing that vitamin probably has a similar root. Vita, life. Right? So expression is therefore life. Not just essential, but it is life. Right? I mean, that word is almost synonymous with essential because it's essential to life, being alive. And vitality is a aliveness. Vitality is often goes along with being expressive. So, okay, roughly getting a sense of where we were at. So, what may be considered to be an expressive action? Action is always expressive in a sense. It may always be considered as the further end of an organismic process towards something which the organism is interacting. Symbolic actions make it unnecessary for the object to be physically present. Hence, even mere thinking is to some extent such an organic interaction. Feelings are always organic interactions with or toward some perceived reality. When we symbolize feelings, we note that we symbolize the kind of tending toward that it is. For example, if we say, I am angry at something or somebody, we neither say just which muscles feel tense, nor what we are angry at, nor just what the feel quality is. We concentrate on the feel, rather, in order to symbolize just what kind of tending toward it is. When we grasp that, it defines both the feeling and the object. Being angry is such a tending toward. So I'm getting the sense from that it's like when we say I'm angry at, right? It's like describing that entire flow between the feeling and the direction and the expressive action and even the object, right? Where that expressive action is going or wants to go. Right? If I'm angry at you, I feel the anger. The expressive action is whatever that might be, like wanting to yell or something. And then it's not just wanting to yell in general, but it's wanting to yell at you. Interesting that he says, hence even thinking is to some extent such an organic interaction. I mean, if you think about it in terms of like what he talked about earlier, with bringing things from the unconscious into the conscious, right? It's a movement. It's an interact. There's an action there. Thinking, in that sense, is interacting with that which is out of consciousness currently, or in that border zone with unconsciousness. Right. And you could describe focusing as that, as a sort of thinking which is interacting with the unconscious. Feelings are always organic interactions with or towards some perceived reality. Right. And he says it doesn't need to be like physically present. Perceived reality might literally just be, memories, like traumatic memories. We are perceiving them in some sense within us, and we have feelings about it. Or just imagination, right? Imagination of a person that we hate or can't stand, and you have feelings toward that person. Or on the other hand, someone that you love. You have feelings toward that person, even though they're not immediately present, but they are perceived in some sense within your reality. Let us now try, on the basis of what has been said, to define expressive action. It is an interaction with or toward some perceived reality. A feeling is expressed when some action occurs toward which that feeling tended. The action occurs in or toward the reality. Symbolizing alone, then, is not yet expressive action. The object is symbolically present, but such difference as can be made in it is quite a pale shadow. To be expressive action, some difference in reality must be noticeable due to the action. Feelings can become in process only toward a reality and are expressed only as action makes a perceived difference in that reality. Okay, this is interesting. Feeling is expressed when some action occurs toward which the feeling tended. So if I'm angry at you, that anger is expressed when some action occurs toward you, or toward my perception of you. Toward, right? It doesn't mean I have to actually hit you, but there has to be some sort of directionality to it. It has to be intended for you and my perception of you. I'm not sure what this means, though. Symbolizing alone. Because obviously we've talked about focusing as that process of symbolizing raw experience. So if we go back to that, right, of focusing being that process of putting attention into your raw experiencing and symbolizing it in some way by giving it a handle, giving it some kind of language or concept, he could be saying that merely that, right, that merely focusing is not expressive action. And that wouldn't be too surprising because he's said many times, don't do focusing alone. And apparently, though it hasn't really been something I've encountered, a common question for him, and I've heard this, is how do you move from focusing into action? Like, what's the next thing? How do you move into life and actually make things happen? I haven't had a problem with that myself, but I guess, people have wanted a further step beyond just the 6 steps that involves taking action. He's talked about this with the metaphor of like, if you only do focusing, it can be like working on an engine and really perfecting the engine and fine-tuning the engine, but forgetting to put the engine in a car, so it never goes anywhere. Nothing ever moves, or you never, like, the engine can be running and, like, you know, stuff can be happening with the engine, but it doesn't go anywhere. So maybe he's getting at that focusing itself is not expressive action. But then he says, right, to be expressive action, some difference in reality must be noticeable due to the action. And he's talked about earlier, right, changing due to a deep feeling of what is, right? So when you feel something through or deeply or really, here, makes the self different thereafter, and you notice that you yourself, your experience of reality and of yourself, has changed simply by feeling something all the way. So I'm not sure, you know, where were we? So I don't know, maybe there's room for that feeling something all the way to be expressive action, since you do come out of that experiencing reality differently. You have a perceived difference in your experiencing. So maybe, we'll see. Expressive action, then, can be defined as a feeling in process. That is, a feeling moving into the action, thus making a difference in the perceived reality with which the organism is now interacting. I think there is room in that for the perceived reality to be also one's own experiencing, right? You perceive and are aware of your own experiencing within you, right? And he's talked about how we ourselves are an interacting. We are a process. We are a flow. And in the process model, he talks about that like the interacting process happens at every level, within us, between us and the outside of us, right? So all of this could be applicable to talking about simply interacting within oneself, and then by doing that, making a difference in the perceived reality of your own experiencing. I think there's room for that, but it doesn't need to be that, right? It could also just be like, he's talking about doing something in the, quote, real world, right? Doing something external to yourself, talking to somebody, doing something behaviorally that changes what's going on outside of you. So let us apply all that has been said to the question of relationship. Why is the relationship so crucial, even when not focused on by the client? What difference does it make to the self, an experiencing process, if another person is present? One answer is that an immense amount of feelings find a reality toward which they may be in a process of organic interaction. This reality is the other person. An immense amount of feelings find a reality toward which they may be in a process of organic interaction. I feel like there's a lot in that. Finding a reality toward which they may be in a process. Right, so the feelings in me have I might just have to keep reading to make more sense of that. My feelings are in interaction with the reality outside of me. That reality being you. Right, my feelings then tend toward you. Let me just try this next paragraph. Very many feelings are such that they may be felt only toward someone. Love, hate, etc. always imply a toward someone. The other person provides a toward, a further end to a feeling process. Feeling processes can come into motion because differences made in the other person can express them. Even symbolic expression, when making a difference in reality, the other person, becomes real, expressive action. This symbolic but real expressive action is crucial to everyone's therapy. Feelings directed at the therapist as such are more rare. Okay, so some of this I understand, some of this I don't understand. I can also see people not necessarily buying this part, right? That love, hate, etc. always imply a towards someone. But I'll acknowledge that not everyone would probably buy that, but I'm not going to dig into that right now. But for ease, let's just assume yes, right? I love someone or something, or even me, myself, or I hate me, or I hate a part of me, right? We can use IFS there and make that part into its own entity, and then it is a someone. Right, and the person provides that other end of the flow of feeling, expressive action, destination of action, right? So the flow can happen from feeling onward. My feelings can occur toward something or someone. But this part, feeling processes can come into motion because differences made in the other person can express them. Differences made in the other person can express them. That I'm not sure what it means. Like, differences made in the other person, like, does that mean like the other person, like in their face, right? You can register that the other person is there with you and responding in some way to what you're saying, right? That your presence is impacting them and they're witnessing you and responding to you. So your presence makes a difference in the other person. So it allows, I guess, I mean, he's not saying this, but like if you have a therapist, for example, or someone who's listening to you who's just like not listening, not paying attention, like if they're on their phone or they're just, listening to music or something in headphones, and they're just not paying attention to you and not responding to you at all, then your presence and what you're saying and what you're feeling and what you're expressing is not going to make a difference in that other person, because they're not taking you in at all, right? And so in such a case, I can imagine you will likely feel, and I know from experience that in such a case, you don't feel heard, right? It's like you're unable to express yourself because there is no difference being made in your perceived reality. Your feelings are there. There's an action, there's an expressive action that's trying to occur, right? Speaking about them. But if the other person is just not taking you in at all, then it's as if that flow is cut off, right? There's no flow happening. So that's how I make sense of that. So the feeling process can come into motion if the other person is engaged and responding to me in some way. I'm not sure what he means by symbolic expression, though. Like, as opposed to verbal, right? So if I just like smile or laugh or cry or make a gesture with my hands, if that is received and the other person responds or like reacts to that expression, then what I've expressed is an expressive action. There was a feeling, I did something, I maybe, made a motion with my hand, or I smiled, and it like flowed through to the other person. So in this way of conceiving it, that would be expressive action. I'm not sure what this sentence is getting at, though. Feelings directed at the therapist as such are more rare. Maybe he just means like feelings that are specifically meant for and about the therapist, as opposed to being about whatever is going on in the person's life that they're there to talk about, right? Like, I'm mad at you, the therapist, as opposed to I'm mad at this other person in my life or about whatever thing. All this follows logically from the concept of one process of feeling, expressive action, perceived difference. Observations of this are equally easy to cite. One may express oneself in a diminished sense, even to oneself. However, depth of feeling and feeling through, rather than anxiety and fear and tension about, seem to occur only when one is expressing oneself towards someone real. Compare, for example, how much more some people can express to God than they can simply by thinking about feelings alone. Expression to someone seems quite easily distinguishable from being alone with feeling. Even when the therapist is not there, the client who knows that he sees a therapist or will soon see one finds that already his feelings are more vivid and go further only because he is thinking of expressing himself to the therapist. I can vouch for that for sure. Like, I've had various times in my life when things are happening and I might just be thinking about it and I feel some, but then I think about telling that thing about my experience and how I feel about the experience. I imagine telling that to a friend or to a family member, and then I might choke up, or I might suddenly feel like a ton of love in my heart, right? Like warmth in my heart, right? So just that extra thing of imagining expressing that thing which I already was thinking about, imagining expressing it to someone else makes it way more thorough and felt and vivid. This is interesting about the God idea, right? Because, well, I won't go into that. But in a very basic way, assuming that you never are like face to face with God as you would be face to face with someone sitting there with you. I know there's more to say about that, but yeah, I guess the essential thing is that you can express yourself to someone without even having someone right there in front of you, and that's an interesting factor. It also makes me wonder about when you gain or develop a more sensitive relationship with yourself, for example, with your body, and can even think of your body as a sort of other in a way. Like in the somatic meditation that I do, Reggie Ray talks about our body being an intimate other. And so we can relate to our body and ask questions of our body and listen to our body. All right. So can we express ourselves to our body as a someone? I mean, I feel like I do this, which is why I'm asking it out loud. Express yourself to your body and see how your body responds. Right? Or IFS parts, right? Express yourself to a part and see how the part responds. The efficacy of a relationship should therefore not be a separate and mysterious question. If we conceive of the self and feeling as process, it becomes immediately evident that such process depends on movement also in the toward, to which it moves and with which it interacts. So, process, if we conceive of ourselves and feeling as a process depends on movement in the toward, in the directionality, right? In where it's going. Not just beginning point and end point, but in that whole sequence, the movement, the directionality, there has to be movement in a direction. That's what I'm reading at, since it's like movement in the toward. The toward is that's a direction word. It's not movement in the receiver, right? It's not movement in the person to whom you're expressing yourself necessarily, but the toward is that space, that direction, space between you and that thing. But maybe that's just a stand-in for the other person or the God or whatever, the therapist, since it says to which it moves and with which it interacts, right? That process of feeling moves to the other person and interacts with the other person. Excuse me. Many clients don't mention the relationship frequently. In fact, there is a slightly negative correlation between success in therapy and verbal focus on the relationship. Only a small percentage of clients work out their problems by seeing them as applying to the therapist. On the other hand, we are all convinced that the relationship is vital to therapy. This contradiction is completely resolved if one conceives of the relationship as providing the reality in which expression, and therefore feelings in process, can make a difference and flow toward. The client need never consider the relationship itself and still become fundamentally changing it. So you don't have to talk about the relationship, but the relationship allows for the feelings to be in flow. By having another person who is affected, right, who has a difference made in them by the feeling and the expression of feeling by the client, allows those feelings to be in process, not just potential. And that is how change happens. That's how the expression happens. Movement, flow in the person, right? If the person themselves is a flow, is a process, then the flow of feelings allows the flow in the person to be in motion. Therapy then goes on in the client, but what occurs in the client moves toward the other person to whom the client expresses. Compare this analysis with the concept of a separate individual. Conceiving the individual as separate leads one to consider what is Conceiving the individual as separate leads one to consider what happens in him, quite apart from the toward which it happens. Such a view ignores the significance of human experience. It conceives of feelings and experience as if they were about nothing and toward nothing, as if one could feel anything, anytime, regardless of world, objects, people, now present. But this isn't so. Real feelings are organic and interactions toward something real. The client who doesn't see what good simply describing his feelings will do is quite right. It won't do much good. Not nearly as much good as expressing toward someone will do. And that happens when he senses that his expression is action making differences in reality. This makes me think about, so I grew up being very pessimistic towards acting kids in high school, for example. I was like, so dramatic, wasn't interested in that stuff, and I kind of derided it in my head. But as an adult, I have done a lot of theater, well, not a lot, but I've done like a year and a half worth of theater. And I specifically got into doing Meisner. And one of the things I always didn't like about my idea of acting was that it seemed fake, right? To act, I understood to mean to pretend, basically. But at least within Meisner, what I discovered is that, let me see if I can just pull the definition from memory. It's basically to act truthfully or to behave truthfully under imaginary circumstances. And so within Meisner, what you learn actually is to respond spontaneously and genuinely and authentically to everything that's going around you in the deepest and fullest possible way. And then you learn to do extremely intricate imagination work so that you can call up into your imagination a different context than the one that you're in the room that you're in. You can call up a very, very vivid other set of circumstances, and then you respond genuinely, authentically, spontaneously to that. You're not making anything up besides imagining the circumstances within you, which you find yourself. Right, so it's like, in that case, acting is not simply about making something up or pretending to feel something at any moment. At least within Meisner, again, this is Meisner, I'm not speaking for all of acting. There are a lot of different acting schools. But you're never controlling for how you're going to feel. You're going to feel however you're going to feel. The only thing you're controlling is what you imagine. You control for the circumstances that you imagine, but then you respond however you're going to respond. So the feelings that you have are about how you right now are interacting with the circumstances that you're imagining. But you're not just feeling any old thing, anytime, regardless. So anyway, my experience very, very, very much backs this up. Meisner is about having real feeling in response to imaginary circumstances. Right? And so the two, you might bring up the same imaginary circumstances on 2 different days and have different feelings in response, and that's like okay within Meisner because it's real. By relationship, then, is meant the difference it makes in each person right now, in the moment, to have this other person present. I suggest that at least part of this difference is, for the client, that there is someone toward whom feeling and expressive action may flow. It is expressive action because it makes a difference in the counselor. I don't know why he uses counselor there all of a sudden instead of therapist, but yeah, there's a lot more to be said about Meisner and how cool Meisner is to consider in relation to all this, like some of the practical exercises that you do around a relationship. But I'll leave that aside for now. Relationship. By relationship is meant the difference it makes in each person right now, to have this other person present. So the difference it makes to me right now in this moment to have you present, and the difference it makes in you right now in this moment to have me present, moment by moment. Your feeling gets expressed and makes a difference in me, and my feeling gets expressed and makes a difference in you, and we are in a constant flow with each other. I did so much practice. This is so fascinating to think about in relationship to Meisner. The basic Meisner practice is exactly this: working one-on-one with another person and just going back and forth, letting each other make a difference in the other person by noticing and sharing what you notice is going on in the other person. It's like I'm sitting there, standing there facing you, and I'm like, you're angry. And you take that in. That makes a difference in you. And then that changes you. And then you speak back to me and tell me what you notice in me. And we go back and forth. And we're constantly noticing and being moved by and changing and expressing toward each of us how we're feeling. It's really powerful. Really, really powerful. The process we described would seem to be the way in which a condition of therapy, in this case, genuineness of the relationship, acts on the client's feelings and experiencing and changing. It provides the one process which is feeling, expressing, and sensing real difference made by expressive action with the last mentioned movement, thus making movement possible for the whole process. Genuineness of the relationship. It has to be real. Real difference made by my expressive actions in you. Allow my feelings to flow and allow for process and therapeutic movement to happen. What kind of response is expressive for the other person? In asking this question, we have an opportunity to look at another condition of therapy in terms of our process model. Not any and all responses, not any and all differences made, are expressive and let feelings be in process. Most of the differences we make in the world are not those that would allow our feeling processes to move. Firstly, actual ordinary actions expressing most potential feelings are inappropriate or dangerous in the present. That leaves symbolic acts. Even with these, we do not usually, in social situations, make the difference that the feeling tends toward. Hence, we feel anxiety, pressure, tension, fear, a lot of feelings that are organically appropriate and in process, rather than those feelings which we endeavored to express. People don't usually allow us a response for those. I think then it seems like the next paragraph might be a little more concrete, like examples of this, but let me just try to make sense of it. So one thing, right? Most of the differences we make in the world are not those. Firstly, So it's not simply making a difference in the world that lets our feeling be expressed. I don't know that he's definitely explained that yet, but actual ordinary actions expressing most potential feelings are inappropriate or dangerous in the present. Inappropriate or dangerous, right? So dangerous is like, okay, obviously, yeah, it's risky, but inappropriate could just mean like saying a thing at a party which is not okay, or which would get other people, frowning about that or uncomfortable, or even just our sense that it's like, that wouldn't be okay to say, and so it remains potential. We don't express because of our sense of that being inappropriate, and then it remains potential in us. Or making a move on someone romantically, sexually, right? If we feel really shy about it and we never do it, all that feeling remains potential because we feel it's inappropriate to express it. Again, he hasn't given an actual definition of symbolic acts, but yeah, I don't know specifically what he means by that. But even with these, we do not usually in social situations make the difference that the feeling tends toward. We do not make the difference that the feeling tends to. That seems like a different way of talking about it than he has before, right? The difference occurs in the other person. But I don't know, maybe again just using an example of like making a move on someone, whether that's just like going up to them and saying hello, or asking them to dance, or going in for a kiss. If we don't do it and we just hold it in, we feel anxiety, pressure, tension, fear. Instead of the feelings that we actually are wanting to express, right? Which is like romantic interest, sexual interest. So that's kind of interesting. He hasn't really spoken about these things as being in process before. He kind of like almost made them sound like they weren't in process. But I mean, if you feel anxiety, tension, fear, those things come out in your behavior and your way of interacting with people. And sometimes you can notice that. You can notice how your own anxiety is being taken in by other people, and that it's, for example, making them uncomfortable, right? But then if we're even uncomfortable with our own anxiety and we feel like it's bad or inappropriate or dangerous somehow, then we might try to shut down our anxiety so that no one even sees our anxiety and our fear, right? And then all that too becomes just potential and stuck inside of us, right? So not only have we not expressed the thing that we wanted to express, we have not expressed the feelings that have kind of like cropped up around that thing that we wanted to express, and so we were just shutting ourselves off from other people. I have definitely been there and done that. Been there, done that. Been there, tried to pretend like I wasn't anxious, and got incredibly drained. And it was no fun. And people were uncomfortable with that. Because then it's like, what the fuck? Try interacting with someone who is not allowing themselves to express what they actually feel and is also not allowing themselves to express their anxiety about that thing. It's just like blank. It's like a weird, dullness, right? It's like, what is going on with this person? I've been that person many, many times for many years. Okay, here we go. Maybe some more concrete stuff. If we are angry, they get angry at us, or change the subject, or try to console us. They rob us of the difference our feeling would make, and give us instead a difference which some other feeling would make, or their feeling. Every difference we perceive that we made implies us in a certain way, as tending toward reality a certain way. Their responses usually imply us as tending quite differently from how we did tend, and so our tending remains a tending, a potential feeling, but no more. Instead, we are compelled to interact organically in the moment in other ways with other feelings. Okay. Right, so if we are angry, we're at a party, let's say. If we are angry and we express that in some way, people don't simply take that in and be like, oh wow, you're angry. It's like, no, fuck you. I'm angry at you. Or let's totally deflect. Change the subject or try to console us is weird. It's like not obvious that would be a thing in the sentence, but to console someone is like to just be like, oh, it's fine, don't worry. Like, it doesn't really it doesn't allow us to fully express our anger, because people are like, oh, there's no reason to be angry, you're okay, it's a fine, right? So it's almost like throwing a blanket over the fire so that it goes away, right? So whereas we're trying to express a feeling, the differences that it's making in other people are I don't know. He hasn't really described this before about like what was it about the way our feelings were making a difference in other people that allowed them for it to be like in process. But something about the angry or the changing the subject or the consoling is like, okay, well, we're making a difference in the other person, but that difference isn't allowing our feelings to be in flow somehow, in process. Maybe this sentence helps. Their responses usually imply us tending quite differently from how we did tend. Right, so maybe we're angry, but then they get angry at us, and it's as if we have done something horrible and violent to them. Whereas our anger doesn't mean that we want to like destroy the other person. It just means that we're angry. But they take it in their own particular way, and then it's like their interpretation, he hasn't used that word, but their response is like they've taken in our feeling as if it were something else than how we are feeling, and then push it back at us with something wholly different. And so then, instead of our feeling getting out and flowing, it goes partway out, but then gets like blocked, basically, right? It doesn't actually get experienced by the other person. Instead, we are compelled to interact organically in the moment in other ways with other feelings, right? Right, because I guess in the case of like a therapeutic environment, if I were angry and I were like ranting about something or expressing anger, the therapist ideally would be capable of just sitting with it and responding and like being there with me and being able to show me that they're witnessing my anger, but not like getting mad at me in return, right? So the flow can happen out of me, and I'm not then smacked in the face with the therapist's intense emotions. The therapeutic response makes feelings and expressive endeavors into feelings in process and into expression, because a therapeutic response is empathetic. That is, it is the difference our feeling makes in reality. It is the completion in action and the result of the action of our feeling, thus become in process. A therapeutic response is empathetic. It is the difference the response is the difference our feeling makes in reality, without adding other feelings to the mix, I guess, right? So if I'm the client and I'm there with a therapist, their response is empathetic in that it is witnessing my feeling, but not adding some sort of reactive emotion in response, right? Like the therapist is, I mean, that's how you want a therapist to be. If you're in IFS, you want a therapist to be in self, right? To be able to be curious and compassionate toward the feelings that are being expressed by the client, right? If your therapist just gets fucking mad when you're mad, like, or mad at you for being mad, then you're not able to express, not to say nothing of the fact that like if they get mad, then you might feel that it's dangerous for you to express, and then you're just gonna stop for safety. So an empathetic response is the difference our feeling makes in reality, not some other feelings, but specifically the ones that we're trying to express right now. If it's responded to empathetically, it's responded to in a way that exhibits the difference that our specific feeling in that moment is making. In summary, there is one process of which different aspects are self, feeling, symbolizing, expressive action, difference in perceived reality. The process is in motion through all these aspects of it, or in none of them. Although the process appears to move from left to right or from inner to outer, it moves simultaneously or not at all. There is no expressive action without a perceived difference, which implies it. There is no feeling in process without expressive action. There would be no self if there were, at any given moment, no feelings in process at all. Ooh, that brings up good old Descartes. I think, therefore I am. I am a self because I think. But yeah, in this case, there would be no self. Remember, self as process. If there were no process, if there were no feelings in process, then there would be no self, because the self is the process. If a self is not in process, then it's not there, it's dead, right? Not even talking about feelings, talking about on a biological, physiological level. If the processes are stopped all the way, then there is not life. There is no self if there is not process. Right? You could think about like the flow of blood in somebody. If the flow is stopped, then the flow gets backed up and it can't move. Right? The expressive action can't take place because the process is stopped. The dependency of motion in the whole process on difference in perceived reality as its further end toward which it tends explains the crucial therapeutic role of relationship. It is undetermined whether the process comes into motion until the perceived difference, the response, occurs and implies the expressive act and the feeling tending toward it. It is undetermined when the process comes into motion until perceived. Okay. We don't know if the process only comes into motion like once the perceived difference occurs. Right? So that whole thing is not, perfectly diagrammable. Like this, then this, then this, then this, then this. Like, where's the beginning? It's undetermined. An expression that did not end in a perceived difference in reality, such that it implies the expression, that isn't an expression, that isn't an expressive action at all. It is an expressive endeavor only. Oh, interesting. Action versus endeavor. So if you're not responded to empathetically, right? If your feeling doesn't make a difference in reality in the way that it's intending, then it's simply an expressive endeavor. It's an attempt to express. So it's more than just the feeling. You had the feeling and you made an action, but the action is not received. It doesn't make a difference. And so the flow isn't open. The process isn't moving. A feeling that does not move into expressive action is not a feeling at all. It is a potential feeling, experienced as tension, anxiety, pressure, self-deprecation, or depreciation, fear, but not experienced in itself. Yeah. I mean, I definitely know the experience of like getting to the end of the day and not having expressed a variety of things and just feeling like full, right? Like that's what that word venting is, right? Venting. Venting. You vent something that is full of stuff. You open the vent and let it air out. But if you're talking to somebody who just gets mad at you for venting or who's not listening to you, then you don't really vent. You can't really vent, right? It's an endeavor to vent, but you're not really venting. A self which has an experiencing process does not include a given feeling. The feeling is potential then. Does not include that feeling in the self, even as generalized structure. A self which does not include a given feeling does not include that feeling in the self, even as a generalized structure. That's a funky paragraph. I don't quite get that. A self which is an experiencing process does not include a given feeling. So if the feeling is only potential, then the self does not include that feeling within it, even as generalized structure. I don't understand how he's bringing back this structure thing, even as generalized structure. That movement from experiencing process versus generalized structure. I'm not sure what that means and what it would mean to include a feeling in the self as generalized structure. Right? Because remember, he's talked about structure as something that is static over time. It doesn't change. So it's like if you took a snapshot of a self as process, if you took a snapshot of it, if there's a feeling in that snapshot, which is only in potential, it is not there somehow. I'm not sure. But I don't know, a snapshot of a self, if that self is conceived of as process, is not really a picture of a self, right? It's a frozen, abstracted, static. It's not in process. It's not a self in that case. The feeling is not in it because it itself is not a self. It's not. I'm just sounding so ridiculous. I get what I mean. Although the process appears as a chain from the inside out, there is motion of the process at any stage only if there is motion in all the stages simultaneously. Okay. Yeah, that part is pretty straightforward. Cool. Well, that is a process concept of relationship. Good stuff. If you've been watching this, you're a hero. Thank you so much. And till next time, be well.